Welcome you all to Chanakya Mandal Pariwar. Today we will all have gathered here for the launch of the new book, Bravehearts of Bharat by Mr. Vikram Sampath, and interaction with the author himself. We at Chanakya Mandal Pariwar start every program and session with Upasana and end every program with Prarthna. Upasana, which are 3 shlokas for gaining knowledge together, and Prarthna, which is a poem written by Dharmadhikari sir originally for himself the day he was selected in the Indian Administrative Service in June 1986. This Prarthana provides us direction in which our efforts shall be directed. Now let us all join together for the Upasana.
Harihi Om.
Let me introduce you to the guest of the evening. Vikram Sampath sir is a Bangalore-based historian and author of 8 acclaimed books, which are Splendors of Royal Mysore, My Name is Guhar Jan, Voice of the Veena, Women of the Records, Indian Classical Music and the Gramophone, and Bravehearts of Bharat. His 2-volume biography, Savarkar, Echoes from a Forgotten Past, and Savarkar, A Contested Legacy, went on to become national bestsellers and were acclaimed by our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi. Dr. Sampath was recently conferred the honor of being elected as a Fellow of UK's prestigious Royal Historical Society and was awarded the Sahitya Akademi's first Yuva Puraskar in English literature. He is also awarded the ARSC International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York for his book on Guhar Jan. The book has also been adapted as a play, Guhar, by Lilith Dubey, and is being adapted to a Bollywood film by Ashutosh Gowarikar. Dr. Sampath was among the 4 writers and artists to be selected as writer in residence at the Rashtrapati Bhavan in 2015. He has a doctorate in history and music from the University of Queensland, Australia, and was a senior research fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. He is also an Aspen Global Leadership Fellow and an Eisenhower Global Fellow 2021 and is currently a senior adjunct faculty at Monash University, Australia. An engineer and mathematician from BITS Pilani and an MBA in finance from SPGen Mumbai, Dr. Sampath is also a trained Carnatic vocalist. He has established the Archive of Indian Music, India's first digital sound archive for vintage recordings. He is the founder-director of the Bangalore Literature Festival, Indic Thoughts Festival, and Earth, a cultural festival. Sitting beside him is Mrs. Shefali Vaidya. She is a multilingual writer and a media professional with a keen interest in history of Indian textiles and temple architecture, history of Goa, and contemporary politics. Ma'am is an award-winning independent author. She is author of best-selling Marathi language books like Chitrangi Re, Ghar Hindate Akashi, and Nitya Nutan Hindave. She has over 20 years of work experience in the field of media and film and TV production. She has given several lectures on textile history in India and abroad. Currently, she is the chief curator of the Western Ghats Literature Festival, Coimbatore. She is a freelance writer and contributes to Swaraj Magazine, Op India, etc. She is a fellow at Ananta Leadership Program, BORI Infosys. She is also a convener of Indic Academy, which works for the revival of Indian culture. She is also a keen collector of Indian heritage and works for the social causes such as heritage conservation, crafts preservation, and Vedic education. Ma'am has worked for the welfare of weavers in 5 Indian states during the pandemic period by conducting fundraisers for them online. She also supports a Vedic Gurukul in Varanasi. Now moving to the man who needs no introduction. Mr. Avinash Dharmadhikari sir, founder and director of Chanakya Mandal Pariwar. He is a teacher, writer, social activist, guide, and guru to many of us. He has served in the Government of India as an IS officer of 1986 batch in the various designations such as District Collector Raigad, CEO Amravati, and CEO Ratnagiri. He has also worked as Secretary to the CM of Maharashtra and Director General of Nehru Yuva Kendra Sangathan in 2001 under Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs. Before joining IS, he has also worked as an Karyakarta of Bharat. He is also a prolific writer of many books, including award-winning Decade of Agony, Nava Vijaypath, Swatantra Nagarik, and recently launched Panchattar Soneri Pane on the eve of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. After resigning from government, Sir started Chanakya Mandal Pariwar in 1996 with motto to develop youth with global consciousness and competence, and to develop professionals with national character. We are happy to say that our Karyakarta Adhikaris are in every corner of India, representing India all over the world. Now I would request Dharmadhikari sir to welcome Vikram Sampath sir and Shefali ma'am.
This one for you, Victor. His next work is going to be on Shivaji Maharaj. And I'm sure you are going to appreciate this also, right? This is Ram Mandir at
Now I request our guest to launch the book. Moving to our next segment, which is question and answers by Shefali ma'am.
Namaste everybody. It's always a pleasure to welcome Vikram and to host a question and answer with him. I can safely say, I don't know if he agrees or not, but he thinks I'm his best interviewer. Okay, I'm selling myself over here. But it's always good to see an audience full of people, and it's even more nicer that I see so many young faces here. So it's a real pleasure to be here. As the person who introduced us said, Vikram is a multifaceted personality. I don't know how he does this, wears his so many hats with aplomb. He's an engineer, he's a musicologist, he's a mathematician, he's a writer, of course, he's a historian. I mean, the list goes on. And he has tremendous stamina. He's been traveling from city to city, launching this book. And his work speed is phenomenal. Welcome Vikram once again to Pune. It's my pleasure. Let's go to the question and answer straight away. George Orwell has said, and I quote, "The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history." Your own book quotes Chinua Achebe in your prologue, where you say, and I quote, "Until the lions have their historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." So let me start by asking you the most obvious question. Why do you want to write about the lions when it is so much more fun and so much more glory to write about the hunters? Why did you choose to be a historian for the lions?
Thank you, Shefali. A very good evening to everyone here, to Avinash ji, whom I deeply admire and respect. Shefali, my best interviewer. That's something I always tell everyone, and to all the eminent people, young friends here. I must say here, and this is not a platitude that I am giving, that the amount of love I've got from Pune is perhaps several notches higher than what I get even in my hometown, Bangalore. Every time I come here, the warmth, the affection with which I'm welcomed here, it really inspires me to come here again and again, and I'm sure after the book on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, I don't know, I might get an honorary citizenship or so of Pune, even if I'm not a resident here. Shefali, that was at very first ball you expect me to hit it out of the park, but that's you. Well, look, history to me is that mirror in which we can identify ourselves as a people, as a nation, as a civilization. And the importance of this discipline is probably never understood by a lot of us young people. While in our growing up years, it's perhaps one of the most boringly taught subjects. Learn by rote, you just know who succeeds whom, which war was fought when. The significance is never, it never dawns on you till you perhaps grow up. And today you realize that all debates in the current time are on matters of history, matters of civilization, matters of identity. And in that, I think the colonial masters, the kind of history that was handed down to us over the several centuries that we've had of colonization, has been that we are not destined to rule ourselves. Right from that myth of the Aryan invasion theory that was created, it was told to us that everybody who's to rule you, who will give you civilization, who will give you education, culture, comes from outside. So it's a natural progression from the Aryans to the Turks to the whoever, Arabs, the Mongols, the Mughals, and then the Dutch, French, Portuguese, whatever, and finally the English East India Company. So it's a natural progression, so you better accept this. And this was dinned down into the heads of all the people whom Macaulay had famously said, we just need a class of interpreters. And the purpose of English education was also to create that vast set of interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, who are only Indian in their, in their blood and their skin color and so on, but they're English in their tastes, opinions, morals, and their intellect. Be that as it may, at least till independence. After independence is the sad part, where I think we added further biases and troubles to this colonial hand down. Again, the people who did that realized the importance of history. In a famous debate with a very erudite politician, I'm not naming the gentleman, he almost gave away this secret that after independence, the purpose of history was marshaled to the task of nation building. So here was a nation that was born out of strife, the scourge of partition, millions had lost their lives, homes, everything. So a new nation was emerging literally out of the blood and the gore of everything that had happened. So in that new nation, there needs to be a history which talks of reconciliation or whatever by subterfuge and not by facing the truth as it is. And this was perfected by ideologically oriented historians whose, I think, purpose somehow seemed to be, in the last 70 years, creating this narrative of us where a young child who reads Indian history today is almost looking at our country from the outside. It's not your own story that you're reading. Vast parts of the country do not get representation. I always keep talking about the Delhi centricity. Delhi gets incommensurate, I think, importance in the history of India. The south of India, from where I come from, or even the Marathas, the northeast, which never gets featured in the larger narrative of India, that is not, there's an imbalance. Whereas every tiny, dynasty that ruled Delhi, Lodhis, Tughlaqs and Khiljis, whose contribution to this nation or our civilization, I would say, is minimal. A child would probably learn by rote all the succession lines, but name 4 Ahom kings. I don't know if anybody here. Can anyone name 2 Ahom kings in this room? The young people who are preparing for IAS. Ahom dynasty ruled Assam for 600 years. 600 years. So 2 Ahoms. Yes, sir. And?
Second I missed.
Okay, at least one, but I was hoping for some of the young people to. Okay, other than Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, 2 Chola kings. Yes.
Sundara Chola and Madhurantaka.
Okay. So anyway, I rest my case. So, so I don't have to illustrate further. And also the narrative that is usually spoken about is that we've always lost battles. Think of all the battles that, which come to your mind immediately. From the Battle of Tarain, India lost, Indians lost. The battle of, all the battles of Panipat, India lost. Haldi Ghati, though we don't talk about the Battle of Diwar a few years later where he regained all that he lost. That is not spoken about. Battle of Buxar, Battle of Plassey, the Anglo-Maratha wars, Anglo-Sikh wars, Anglo-whatever. Everything, the wars that you speak about are the ones that you have lost. So you are literally putting in the subconscious of a young person that we are a nation of losers, we are destined to be ruled by outsiders, we have been given everything from the outside. But if we are around today as a civilization, the only pre-bronze civilization that is still surviving, there must have been some wars we won also, and some amount of resistance, courage, valor that we put. So this book, I mean, the idea for it germinated when I was having this discussion with my dear friend Sanjeev Sanyal. We were having this talk with each other. He said, can you name 10 battles where India won or Indians won? And both of us had a tough time to think of those instances or those heroes and heroines of the country who actually led that resistance. And I think that is where the story of the lions becomes important. For the longest time, we have been valorizing the hunters. So finally, the lion, which is a subaltern, is speaking. Of course, there is a very thin line between, I know, revisionism and jingoism and, you know, Mera Bharat Mahan, and, you know, you go on that complete extreme of saying everything about the past is great. But then that is an unwanted consequence. But then feeling of genuine pride, genuine, acknowledgement of the achievements of your ancestors, achievements of us as a nation, a civilization, is something that I think the new India that we're talking about is waking up to finally.
That was a very illuminating answer, which brings me to the next question, the title of your book. Obviously, you've consciously chosen to call it Bravehearts of Bharat and not say Unsung Warriors of India, which would have been probably the more obvious, English title. So why Bravehearts of Bharat? I know it's nice and alliterative or whatever, but what I'm really trying to ask is that, is it your way of subtly saying that the chroniclers of modern India have not been fair to the Bravehearts of Bharat?
Yeah. True. And I think, I don't want to create this, binary between India and Bharat and say the usual this thing that, these are at odds with each other. Our constitution also starts with India, that is Bharat. But civilizationally, I think the word Bharat itself has so much of history behind it, so much of subtlety behind it, so much of meaning. And our ancestors imagined this landmass, this sacred geography in that way. I mean, from the times of the Vishnu Puran, which very evocatively and very clearly demarcates Uttaram yat samudrasya himadraschaiva dakshinam varshatad bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. This mass of land south of the Himalayas and north of the oceans is the Varsha, or the country is Bharat, and its santati or children are Bharatiyas. So I think that imagination was very clear as to what Bharat was. So in this book talks of civilizational heroes and heroines, and I thought there Bharat is important. But to ensure that there's no this fight that goes on, the subtitle says vignettes from Indian history, so that there is no conflict created between these two.
When I was preparing for your interview, I actually went through your
prepared a lot.
I went through your past interviews, and I realized that, okay, there are some questions which everybody will ask you, and I don't want to be, the one repeating those questions. But here is a question which nobody has asked you. So, and I think that's a very important question because it kind of puts the book into perspective. You've ended your prologue with a very important concept, the Indic way of looking at history. You've quoted a shlok attributed to Kalhan, one of the earliest Indian historians and the writer of Rajatarangini. And it basically defines Itihasa as the narratives of the past in story form to impart instruction, and this is important, on how to pursue the 4 Purusharthas for the subsequent generations, right? So I think this is a very interesting definition, and that sort of puts into perspective the Indian way of looking at history, and that explains why we are not timeline obsessed.
Yeah. Because
our objective was different. So I want you to elaborate a little on this, because that sort of puts the book into perspective.
Yeah. I mean, we have a very different concept of time. The Kala Chakra is cyclical. Our yugas come one after the other. We don't follow a linear narrative. And the Kalhana shloka that you mentioned, Dharmartha Kama Mokshanam, Upadesha Samanvitam, Kathayuktam Puravrittam, Itihasam Ta Chakshmate. The narratives of the past, or Puravrittam, told in a story form, or Kathayuktam. and which have a didactic element to it. There has to be some moral value to society, upadesha samanvitam, and helps also in the attainment of the 4 purusharthas of dharma, artha, kama and moksha. Itihasam ta chakshmate, that is called itihasa, and the word itihasa itself in Sanskrit is it does happen. So there was a very, very clear enunciation of what is history, what is the objective of history, which is a very unique Indic perspective to it. Now, over the, I think, centuries, particularly what we call today as history, which is academically studied and so on, is the Western positivist model. Leopold von Ranke's model of positivism, where everything needs to be evidence-based. History and humanities, it's not a physics or chemistry lab where you can put the chemicals and see things happening. History itself is such a, I always keep saying this, a historian needs to be the most humble person in the universe, whereas that's not how most of our eminent historians are. And why should that be? I would like to illustrate that. The event has already happened. By the very nature of the past, it is not present. It has happened thousands, hundreds, several years ago. What happened last month, we may not have records. We are talking of several centuries. Now the sources, modern historian depends on sources. These sources are themselves, largely either, compromised, they are intervened, they are destroyed over the centuries, invasions, so many natural calamities, whatever be it. They have been, incomplete. The sources could be biased themselves. Most of these people who wrote the written sources, if you look at them, they would all be by court historians or so, and they would have to extol their Maharaja, their Badshah, and whatever. So the bias comes in the source. Now this incomplete, biased, compromised source comes into the hands of a modern historian who's trying to look at it. Now, I come to the table with my own set of biases. Anybody who says I'm an unbiased person is a liar. So you do come with some amount of biases to the table. I also come to the table with my incompetence. If we do have eminent historians of ancient India who don't know Sanskrit and very proudly flaunt it, of medieval India who say we don't know a word of Arabic or Persian, but then how much of the original source can you then read if you don't know the original language? So your incompetence comes in, your bias comes in, the source is already incomplete, and passing through so many filters of compromise, of incompleteness, you are then having a small little extract which you can see how different it is from what was the original truth. So that's one reason a historian needs to have that humility that I am just showing a little bit of what is available and accessible to me. And so today I may write this, I may have written this book on Savarkar or anyone. Now anybody who finds better sources can completely turn my thesis on its head, and my book can be in the dustbin. And that is the greatness of the discipline. And I think the Indic view understood that. And so that is one reason lot of the history too was narrated in the story form. So the itihasas were the Ramayana, Mahabharata and the Puranas. Now in that there are so many stories, fantastic tales, all of that is there. But couched within all this kavya was the kernel of truth somewhere. And the importance of the kavi in the Indic imagination. A mathematician was also a kavi, a historian was a kavi, and the Mahakavyas that were written thereby. So we keep talking of the Sulva Sutras and that the Pythagoras theorem is derived from there. But if you read the Sulva Sutras or the what is called the Vedic mathematics, that is not going to directly tell you a square equal to b square plus c square. It will be written in a kavya form, and in that kernel is how it is extracted. Everything in India, people want it to make it a puzzle. It's not easily got. So including mantras and so on, those who are into Devi Upasana, they would know that the Shodashi mantra, which is such the kernel of the Shakta philosophy, it is embedded somewhere in the Lalita Trishati. So if you actually take all the first syllables of all that, join all that, you get the Shodashi mantra. And the Panchadashi and the Shodashi. But that will not be told to you, take it. So the seeker also needs to do some work. So similarly, here in history too, in the midst of all these stories and so on, the kernel of truth is there. But including the Mahabharata, the Bhishma Parva has about 70 verses which talk extensively about the geography of the time, the different races. It's probably an anthropological document too, which talks about races of the time, the Vamshavalis that are there of all the rulers and the dynasties. That gives you an indication of the history also. A lot of it is fantasy, and it's up to again the modern historian to bifurcate between the two. But this school, in this Rankian positivist school, which has become the dominant academic pursuit of history, this view has never been entertained. And I think there is a case to build where the Oriental cultures had their own way of doing things, which whether it's China or India, I think it's time to start looking at it without that Western derision and the lens with which our colonial masters did. And I think Maharashtra and Pune led that, that entire battle. I mean, when James Mill wrote his History of British India, it was a completely derisive thing where he said everything about Indian culture is just bakwas, nothing about it. And then the waves of nationalist historiography started from Maharashtra, where it was a colonial nation, slave country, so openly they could not write books. But anonymous letters used to be written. The first Hindu, the second Hindu, the third Hindu, several iterations. And these people rebutted James Mill, and that led to the nationalist school of historiography, V.K. Rajwade, Bhandarkar, all these people who came from this place. So I hope, Maharashtra again, and Pune particularly, with all the wonderful institutions like Bori and Bharat Itihas Sanshodhak Mandal and so on, leads this revolution to start looking at our history our way. When we talk of decolonization, that is exactly what it is. We don't need to be told how to look at our own past by some model which you will retrofit into our understanding. We will develop our own thing and we'll be very confident about it, rather than being very defensive and saying it's inferior to someone else. It is not. It's our way of looking at life, and we are unique in every aspect.
Very, very true. That's actually a very wonderful way of looking at it. In this book, you've taken 15 personalities, and obviously you have gone through a lot of research work or a lot of preparation to decide which 15 you will choose. And
no, it was more about which to leave.
I can imagine. What I found interesting and very encouraging was that about half of these people are women, as they should be. And you've taken examples right from the time of Nayaki Devi, who fought Mahmud of Ghazni, to Begum Hazrat Mahal, who fought the British. And this is very refreshing actually, because these are women from different parts of India with very different backgrounds who are doing very different things, but there is one thing common about them, that they're very fierce and they're very powerful. So my question to you was, why was this due not given to the women of this India? And these are not just the only women in history, there are many more. So why was our history always his story? And you've said about it, you've talked about it as well. Why was it not her story? Yeah. And the secondary question to that was, when you were researching, because women were systematically kept out of the narratives, when you were researching on these women characters in our history, did you find the process even more difficult than
yes.
otherwise?
Yes, immensely. I think it's someone should just write an entire book only on the women warriors or the heroines of India, because they've never been given the kind of due that they deserve. Just a few instances even of the people who are featured in this book. You spoke about Rani Nayaki Devi of the Chanakya dynasty, Solanki dynasty of Gujarat, who in 1178 in this battle called Battle of Kasarhada, she defeats Muhammad Ghori. Muhammad Ghori, and Muhammad Ghori thinks, and she's a Goa princess, the Kadamba Goan princess, and she's married into the Chalukya Vansh, and the king, her husband, is murdered, and she becomes a regent of a small little infant, Mool Deva II. And Ghori thinks that now there's a woman there, so easily I can defeat this lady and take over Gujarat. But he's in for a shock, because she pulls him to her stage of advantage, where she's at an advantageous position, a numerically inferior army, but ensures that at that battle in 1178, Muhammad Ghori is trounced completely. And he literally has to run away from Gujarat, and he never turns back to Gujarat again. His own chroniclers talk so, embarrassingly that he was defeated by a woman. But come to the Indian chroniclers, her own time, Meru Tunga, Somashekhara, all these people who have written, half of them don't even mention her name. But those who do it also, they say that the Hamira, that was the name for Ghori, the Hamira was so weak that even a woman could defeat him. Don't give her credit. If the opponent was very brave and strong, then she would have lost. So that is the kind of, and hardly 2-3 lines about her. And that infant is given so much. Even the inscriptions, the Chalukyan inscriptions, give that infant Raja, who I'm sure had no role to play in this battle, unless he was a very precocious kid who could fight even at that age. He was 4 or 5 years old or whatever. So he is given all the credit, but the lady, we don't know anything about her, whether she died after that, whether she survived to see a better day, nothing known about her. So literally, looking at needle in the haystack, so to say. And the other sad part which I saw, the common narrative among all these women, their own chroniclers, their own subjects, almost made it was a very common thing to insinuate that this lady used black magic. So, yeah, Rani Didda of Kashmir, she was always this thing that she was such a cruel lady that she used to use black magic. They would kill their own children. That's a common theme all through, even here. Rani Abbakka from Karnataka, she was also the insinuation that an Italian traveler who comes and sees, he says, I spoke to the common populace and she'd lost some children, which was common those days. The mortality rate was so less, so children would die. So people would insinuate that she poisoned them or she did black magic. Similarly, even down to Ahilya Bai Holkar. Even in her case, when her son Male Rao, who was mentally not sound and so on, and he also dies early, one of the chroniclers talks about how subjects, there were murmurs that she had only done him away. But if it was a king, nobody would have said that. It's only when there's a lady who's ruling that people would never accept and make all these wild charges and allegations. Maybe in the bazaar gossip, this would be the thing that she's such a wicked lady, that she's using black magic all day and doing all this. And the reluctance of the people to even accept a woman sovereign. In the 13th century, I talk about Rani Rudramma Devi of Warangal, whose father of the Kakatiya dynasty, Ganpati Deva, he has no children. So he goes for this Putrika Yajna, where if a sonless monarch makes the daughter's son or the daughter itself as a son and anoints her or the grandson, Dohitra, as your successor. So he does that with Rudramma, and her gender is concealed. She's sent away to a distant place. She gets all her military training and all that there, and only when she comes of age and when her gender can't be concealed any longer, then it is revealed. But by then she is powerful enough, and both of them jointly rule the kingdom for several years before this Ganpati Deva dies. And from the day she ascends the throne, the amount of resistance she faces from within the family, from within the nobility, and all the neighboring kingdoms, the Yadavas of Devgiri or the Pandyas from south, the Gangas of Kalinga, they're constantly attacking her. And this lady, till the last breath, poor woman, is actually fighting incursions, invasions. At the age of 80, she is in a battlefield, and she dies in battlefield against invader. So the difficulty that these women rulers, I think, faced was immense, and we have simply not, and it's not a modern day problem. I think their own contemporaries didn't give them the due that they deserve.
That is true, but at the same time, they also had, many of these rulers, they also had people within their fold who backed them through thick and thin and ensured that they broke all stereotypes. For example, Parmadi ensured that his daughter Nayaki Devi studied sword fighting, horse riding and all of that. So did Ganpati Deva. So did even for that
Velu
matter, Velu Nachar. And Malhara Holkar, who actually stopped his daughter-in-law from committing sati, and he told her that you are like a son to me, so come and take charge of this kingdom. So despite this, and this kind of space was given, but despite this, what I find poignant and tragic was that Ahilya Devi could not stop her daughter going sati. So partly it is like, see, what I'm trying to say is that Indian history is a very twisted skein of many narratives, and there is no one way of looking at it and saying that, okay, this is a simplistic, definitive way. So what's your take on this?
Perfect. I think you hit the nail on the head, because I think in India, one size fits all model never exists, right? I mean, we are a land that revels in multiplicity and diversity. So as easy as it is to slot everything as Brahminical, patriarchy and all those high sounding terms, there are examples like this. You talked about Malhara Holkar, who ensured that his daughter-in-law got education, and he trusted her more than his son, who was a wayward guy. And he ensured that even when he went out to battles, and the third battle of Panipat also, from there he sends letters to her. He keeps her abreast of all the political developments in the country, shares with her details of administration, finance, everything that she's taught by him. And as you rightly said, when the son dies and all the other queens perform sati, he says, you should not do that because you're my support. And after he passes away, she takes over Malwa and becomes the queen of Indore. So there are examples like this. There are also examples of all these chroniclers. So it's very difficult to slot anything in India, I think, with a simple definition. There are so many, it's a case-by-case analysis that I think one needs to do.
Absolutely. Which brings me to the next question. A lot of modern historians, particularly the Marxist historians, have tried to consciously put out a narrative that India was always a disunited country. The kings didn't know how to work together. That is why the British basically just came and walked all over, and there was practically no resistance, and you've talked about it. But in your very first vignette on Lalitaditya Muktapida, there is an example here of how Indian kings worked together, if not very explicitly, implicitly, to fight Junaid.
Yeah.
So if that kind of cooperation was there at that point of time, that kind of alliance, that kind of strategic thinking, what do you think was lost that we couldn't replicate it in the later years? As a historian, this is something that I would like to know from you.
There also, Shefali, I think it's not so simple, the answer. Because, let's take the advent of the Arabs itself, and I've mentioned this several times, that the Arabs, within say half a century of the passing away of the Holy Prophet, the Caliph had gone on their expansionist drive, largely driven by theological reasons of wanting to establish a large Islamic empire. And almost the whole of, within, as I said, 50-60 years after his passing away, a massive empire was built in Central Asia, North Africa, and the empire stretched from the shores of the Atlantic on the west to the gates of India on the east. It was so easy to have those countries capitulate, which also brings me to one more point which I mentioned here, that Arab cartographers themselves spoke that we are told that the society was so decadent, and so that is why invasions happened. Whereas the eyewitnesses there, they were talking about how the Indian society was so virtuous, so wedded to justice and dharma and all of that, and it's a prosperous nation too. So whether the society became decadent because of the invasions, or was a decadent society inviting invaders, that is also a question to be looked into. So, but it took the same Arabs 70 years even to conquer Sindh. And beyond Sindh, the tiny strip that they managed to conquer in 710 with Muhammad bin Qasim, they could not get into the rest of India. And it took 500 years to establish an Islamic Sultanate in Delhi in 1206. So while all those places fell so easily in 50, 60 years, what was it here that kept them away for so long? The Arabs could not establish an empire. The Turks, whether it was Ghazni or Ghori, they just kept coming and going. And it was much later that we had the Delhi Sultanate being established. So during that time, there are several alliances which were made against the Arabs. Lalitaditya Muktapida of the Karkota dynasty of Kashmir. How many of you had heard of him? Okay, that's 0.01% maybe. So he was called the second, Samudragupta and an Alexander of India and all kinds of honorific names, who had a vast Kashmiri empire which was very, very predominant. He joins hands with his arch rival Yashovarman of Kannauj and ensures that the Arabs are pushed out from the northern part. From middle India and southern India, you had a huge alliance of people like Bappa Raval, you had Jay Bhatt, the fourth, Vikramaditya, the second, the Chalukya Empire from Badami, and his feudatory Danti Durga of the Rashtrakutas, Pulakeshin, the Lata king from Gujarat, all these people forming a huge alliance and they pushing the Arabs out. So they were joining hands, and we find these examples throughout the book. In various time spans. Much later, 200 years later, even a small little place in Karnataka, Ullal, ruled by Rani Abbakka, she forms a little alliance with all the coastal kingdoms in Karnataka and Kerala, whether it's a Samudrin or the Zamorin of Calicut, the Raja of Kannanur, you had Keladi, Venkatappa Nayaka, Bhaira Devi of Gersoppa, all these little provinces who probably, less than the span of the city, they all joined hands and pushed the Portuguese out of their territories. So there was that. And distant Assam in the 17th century, when they had to form this alliance against the Mughal invasions, the Ahoms joined hands with the Rajas of Kachar, of Jaintia, the Kuch Bihar, so many, Rani of Darang, all these little provinces in and around northeast India, they all joined hands and formed a big alliance to throw this Aurangzeb out of Assam. So these instances are there when we join hands also. But there are also instances which I mentioned where even someone, and I know, people may not like me telling that, but Naiki Devi, when Ghori invaded, sent out emissaries to all the princes in the vicinity, including the great Prithviraj Chauhan, saying, let's all join hands and form a northern-western alliance to throw Ghori out. And Jayachandra, of course, but Jayachandra never joined even Prithviraj and betrayed him and all that. But then Prithviraj Chauhan was very suspicious of the Chalukyas for various reasons. And a woman at it. So, no, if he comes to my territory, I'll look after him when he does that. So there were some examples of, for whatever reason, I won't say lack of foresight, maybe some personal rivalries and all that which came, where they didn't see the larger picture. So it's not just like you talked about the women case. There's no one rule fits all, that we were completely united all the time or we were completely disunited all the time. There was a little of both. And history should teach us that every occasion where we were disunited, we failed horribly. And so that is the only lesson that today's generation can draw from this.
Fair enough. They say that a historian is as good as his or her sources. So when you were writing about these 15 heroes and heroines, most of the material about them was either in regional languages, and secondly, many of this was in the form of folk literature, either songs or ballads or plays or whatever. So when you were referring, how did you make that call that this is credible, this is the actual retelling, or is this just a hagiographic, narration to recount the valor of that person? How do you make that call?
That's the biggest conundrum for I think a modern day objective historian. But there also, Shefali, we are all the time, right from what Al-Baruni told of us, that we don't keep, the Hindus don't know how to keep their history and records, and it's all fantasy, and the same thing right down to Macaulay and everybody. We actually maintained records. It was just in a very different way. The Cholas, for instance, they left so much of copious documentation.
Yes.
Sometimes in triplicate, so that if one gets destroyed, the other remains. You know, on palm leaf manuscripts, on temple inscriptions, on coins. Now the Brihadishwara, the big temple, the Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur, it has documentation of even the 400 Devdasis who were dancing in the temple and singing in the temple, their names, their addresses, their mothers' names, their emoluments, everything, address also noted on the temple walls. And we say we don't have a sense of documentation. I think we, right from the time, you know, in our puja, the sankalpa and everything that we do, we geotag ourselves, right? Jambudvipe, Bharatavarshe, Bharatakhande. We also note the nakshatra, the date, the time. We are doing it constantly. Maybe we're not writing it down like how someone in the West would. But the Cholas maintained records. You go all the way up to Kashmir. Kalhana gives this wonderful, Rajatarangini, which is one of the most beautiful documentations of the entire history of Kashmir and all its Hindu Rajas. You go all the way to Assam. From 4th century BCE, Assam has documented history. And the Ahoms further, right from 1228 when they came to power till the 19th century when they lost it, you have what are known as the Buranjis, and I discovered that only now when in the course of this book. The Buranjis are documented details of the entire Assamese history. And I wondered, why are these, at least forget folklore and all these things, even the documented stuff, why has that not come out other than maybe, people like the late Professor Nagaswamy, who did seminal work on Chola history and bringing all of that out. The Buranjis are lost. The Assam governments have digitized it, have made it available, but it's all in the Ahomia language, and so people need to translate it. So modern historians have not even bothered to look at those. But folklore also, interesting example, it's the times of Kantara, and so everyone has gone and seen, I hope, the film. So not only deities and spirits and all that, but in coastal Karnataka, also these characters of the past, heroic kings and queens, they are also invoked in this Bhuta Aradhane tradition. And I was fortunate to actually witness a Bhuta Aradhane where Abbaka was invoked. And there were actually 4 Abbakas. And so in Kannada, this thing is Abbaka Devi Yaru. They are invoked in the collective, the Deviya, Abbaka Deviya. So, and all of them had some, fight to do with the Portuguese. They all ensured that they kept the Portuguese out of their little principality. In that Bhuta Aradhane, this practitioner is talking about all this. There was talk about how I took this coconut, and in that there were ammunition that was put, and we hurled it at the Portuguese armada, and so much of the Portuguese ships caught fire, and the Bhuta ritual person, laughs in exultation. Now that is actually true when one triangulates that with some of the written sources. There is evidence of the fact that how using her, the Mapillas, the Mogaviras and all these soldiers that she had, they actually did this in the midst of the night when the Portuguese armada was at the gates of Ullal. Very stealthily, coconut, it was widely available, so you just carved out a hollow there, put the gunpowder, and all of this was hurled at this Portuguese, and 200 ships caught fire, they got destroyed, some of their governors, everyone got burnt. And the fact that it is documented and true was the fact that this story carried all the way to Persia. And the emperor of Persia was talking about this and said, oh, we've heard of this, some lady who, did this to the Portuguese, what a great story. And that was heard by this Italian traveler, Pietro della Vel, who is quite fascinated. And when he comes on his travels to India, he documents this, that the emperor of Persia told me that in the court that a Portuguese a lady in India did this to the Portuguese, and I was very fascinated to come and see her. So, you triangulate, so that Bhuta Aradhane person obviously doesn't know who Pietro della Vel is, but then somewhere, maybe a lot of fantasy is there in that. But in the middle of that, just as what we spoke about Kalhana and the kernel of truth being in the midst of this vast amount of fantasy, I think that taking that out, that is the job of our craft and what we are trained to do.
And I think we haven't done due justice to the ordinary people of India who have carried forward these stories, who have carried forward these narratives, who have carried forward this memory of civilizational pain, and who have tried to resist in their own way. The question I want to ask you is, see, we have been told, and you've referred to that also, that there is a pretty simple, linear, singular narrative of Indian history, where we were this civilization which basically lived in huts and ate berries, and then people kept coming from the west, the Huns, the Scythians, whoever. Then the Islamic invasion happened, and then they gave us biryani, and then they gave us architecture, and then they gave us gardens, and then they civilized us. Then the British came, they gave us postal system, they gave us railways, they gave us English language, but they didn't do anything bad. And then they got tired, and Gandhiji said, give us our country back, and they gave the country back and then left. That is basically the narrative that's being fed to us, very simplistically. But again, in a country like India, which is so diverse.
You summed up all of NCRT books in one.
So what would your advice be to the young historians who want to navigate this vast, complex field of Indian history, which is full of multiple narratives happening at the same time, because we are not a simple country. We were never a simple country, we are not a simple country even now. So if anybody among this audience wants to take up history and history writing as a career, what would you advise them to avoid this pitfall of this simplistic, singular, linear version of history?
First of all, being aware that we've been fed this simplistic narrative, which again has become so indoctrinated in our heads, we probably don't recognize it. And once you are aware of it, the amount of frustration and anger you feel at the kind of lies that are fed to you is indescribable. And you're almost like you said, you churn out so many books, you feel like a man in a hurry. I mean, life is short. I don't know how much more of mine is left. So in that, I have lots of things to finish and do. So that is the, speed and the frustration that builds within you. But I hope I think now the awakening is coming among people, that people are demanding to know the truth, demanding to know their own past. And to some extent, with pros and cons, social media also ensures that, anybody with some amount of little bit of search abilities, online and offline or whatever, is able to challenge even the greatest eminent historian. You had that example, right, where some of them were talking about this painting where Krishna and the gopis and all of these are going, and he's showing somewhere there, and then they said this is Eid Ka Chand, and so and this was the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb that we were, and then many people actually brought that out, that this is not, it's a Jaipur Rajasthani miniature, and this actually in the detail of that it was mentioned that he's showing Nanda's house or some such thing as they were walking up, so he was not showing the moon. So but then you can twist it and turn it in whatever way to suit your political narrative of today, which today is being busted by common people. But I once again say that Twitter, social media has its importance, and you need countering at every level. But the alternative, there is no alternative to scholarship. There is no alternative to books and more books. One can, till the cows come home to graze, you can keep talking about leftist historians, what they did, this, that, and the rest, which a lot of people do. But I think that doesn't help beyond a point. What is the substantial material that can be put as a nationalistic, version of history? I don't want to get into right wing, left wing, this wing, that wing. Something that talks, as I said, a decolonial narrative of our history, spoken from our eyes, seen from our eyes and our perspective. I think until that becomes a national movement, a very important national movement, and people especially understand that if that is not done, your future generations are going to grow up with this warped version of our own past, our own identity, our own sense of nationhood and civilization, and therefore it needs an urgent correction and revisiting. And tell the truth, as I always say, tell the truth as it is. Stare the damn truth in the eye and just get done with it. All for the longest time, we have involved ourselves in so much of whitewash and subterfuge and all this, and that bane has to go. But in terms of the field itself, it is so vicious, it is such a toxic cesspool that all the young people who dare to get into this Dharma Yuddha, please beware that there will be lots and lots and lots of hit jobs, attacks, which as most of you know, I am all the time facing and got so immune to it now, both nationally and internationally also. So yeah, you must hire a good lawyer because there will be several cases you will have to file, some philanthropist who will fund those court cases. So all those are the unwanted side effects of historiography, which will distract you from your actual work and research. But I don't blame them. I mean, someone is upsetting an apple cart which has been so deeply entrenched and, establishmentarian historians. If you come and this is the last citadel that is left, so if that is also stormed, they have no place to stand, and so obviously the backlash will be there. But it is a fight worth fighting because it is for your country and for your future generations. And I think that is the service that a lot of people should engage in.
Last question. You clearly stated in your prologue, and I quote you again, that it's not the historian's task to create a sense of pride in your history, but it is also not her task to induce a sense of shame or guilt either. So let me ask you in one sentence, what is the historian's real task? Just one sentence.
To illuminate the facts, to illuminate the archives, and bring the documents to the public realm. That's it. And let the people make their choice.
Thank you so much. As always, it was a wonderful interaction. Do we have time for audience questions? Okay. Okay, having so many great warriors, why did India only take defensive stance? Why did our rulers not cross the Bolan and Khyber passes and destroy the invaders' territories? Is this defensive stance a reason for our subjugation?
No, we did take defensive stance. If you actually look at Lalitaditya's stories, in several occasions, very proactively, he also crossed all the major passes in Tibet and Gilgit-Baltistan and that entire northwest frontier province, and liberated it from the influence of the Chinese, of the Tibetans, and so many people. Even down south in the Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, the attack on Shri in the Malay Peninsula in 1025 CE, that was very unprovoked and very proactive. And the difference only being that most of these were not elements of colonization. I think it was all, through the motivation was trade, economic purposes. The Cholas, along with the Fatimids of Egypt and the Song dynasty of China, they were one of the three major global powers which controlled the entire maritime trade in the Indian Ocean and the Southeast Asia region. So constant jostling among each other, and this proactiveness to have a military offensive or a naval offensive to safeguard your trade interests rather than go and colonize that place and so on. They would go there. So Sri Lanka too was destroyed by the Anuradhapura, the capital, and Rajaraja or Rajendra, they would go and in their typical fashion build that long Gopuram wala mandir of Shiva, and that is this thing that we have captured this. But a viceroy or someone would be placed from among the local community or the local, if there are two groups in the family of the ruler whom they have defeated, someone else on the collateral line would be placed there as a viceroy. Unlike even the Arabs, that on the same time, they were actually sending people all the way from their lands to come and stay here as a colony and, do this. So I think that was the difference. There were other, kings, in the midst of this, when a lot of comments that come to me saying, why did you leave this? Why did you leave that? There was one interesting person whom honestly I had not heard of. I don't know if anyone has heard in this room. I think I'll gift a book to them. Langula Narasingha Deva. Upar. He's heard of him.
Was it a Pallava king who was from
No.
Vietnam?
sorry, you don't get the book. So he was from Odisha.
He's a Rajapati king of Orissa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your name? Okay, you definitely deserve a book.
So the 13th century ruler of Odisha, who also supposed to have built the Konark temple, and interestingly, all these warriors built sun temples. Lalita Aditya built the Martand temple in this.
He was a Chola grandson, no? This Narasimha Deva who built Konark.
Yeah.
His mother was a Chola.
Yes, Chola.
Yes.
Yeah. And he proactively took measures to ensure that the Turkic invasions which were happening around that time did not get into Odisha, Bengal and this entire region. Whereas most of the other people were reacting to invasion. So I think if one actually digs into it, we may not know these names because they have not been told to us or they've been consciously hidden from us. If we dig into it, we'll probably get...
So the next question is, even after having so many great warriors and victories, what do you think is the most important reason for India to lose its independence to invaders from time to time? I think one of the lessons you've already said, that wherever we were united, we won. Wherever we were not united, we didn't win. But is there anything else that you think matters?
Yeah, I think over time also the natures of conflicts changed. Against the Arabs and Turks, as I mentioned, we managed to put up a good defense. Now, even the Sultanate that was there, Delhi Sultanate, it never managed, what was its sphere of influence? Of course, some of them, the Khiljis and so on, had influences, beyond just Delhi. But their axis of influence was restricted. There were rebellions all the time. The Mughal Empire too. I mean, in the 150 years that it was there, if you look at the expanse, all the time there were rebellions in different parts, some within their own kingdom, some from local powers and so on. So it was never one consolidated, none of them managed to occupy the whole of the Indian subcontinent. So there were pockets of resistance all through. But I think the natures of conflict, particularly with the European powers coming to India, I think that changed, and maybe we were not prepared for the a trading power actually coming with the idea of colonizing. And I think since we're in Pune, we must also mention what Savarkar had famously called our shortcoming as the Sadguna Vikriti.
Yes.
Right? So we have all these lovely ethics and codes of warfare right from the Mahabharata times, that Suryast ke baad nahi ladenge, we will not attack women, children, nihathon pe waar nahi karenge, bachchon pe waar nahi karenge. But you are dealing with an opponent who doesn't believe a toss in all of this. And you are unilaterally acting very virtuous, as if someone is going to give you a Nobel Prize for that. But in the process, and that's why most of the Rajputs and particularly them, so many, even in this book I talk about, they've caught the Khilji Sultan, put in jail for 6 months, but then he will plead and say, I will be loyal to you. He will believe and send him off, rather than finishing him off. And that would have ended the story then and there. And when the opponent is not following that, he is attacking your places of worship, your women are sent away as sex slaves and sex trade that is done, all of this. What is the point of having this Sadguna Vikriti of unilateral virtuosity which helps nobody?
Okay, this is an interesting question.
You were smiling all through, I knew something is coming up my way.
Don't you think if we just praise ourselves and not address the problems of Hindu society, we are at a risk to move from genuine sense of pride to jingoism?
No, I didn't get it.
Don't you think that if we just praise ourselves, like apparently this book is just praising ourselves and not address the problems of Hindu society, we are at a risk to move from genuine sense of pride to jingoism? Whatever you make of it.
I honestly didn't understand. First of all, I don't think I'm praising ourselves in this book at least. There is an assessment of our successes which have not been told to us. For the longest time, we were only told about our failures. We are talking about our successes also now. But alongside successes, you can't talk of it if you don't talk about instances of failure, which also I do. So I think that balance is important. And Hindu society, that's another issue, and I think that doesn't come into this.
Okay, this is also, you can choose to take this question, but it's more of your general outlook. It says that I understood what you've said in the book. What can I do in my day-to-day life besides voting in the elections and enhancing my knowledge by reading such books?
Voting in the elections.
No, voting in the elections and reading such books. What can he or what can ordinary Hindus do, basically? I think that is the question.
I think being aware of your past is a lot more than voting and paying your taxes. And you will then, when you grow older and have children and so on, you're transmitting that knowledge to your next generation. And we will not be a self-loathing generation of Indians, as a lot of us have become, especially after independence. So I think beyond that, what can you do is also spread awareness. Today, information is power, and it can be click of a button. You can do so many things. Many people may not read books. So if you've read a book, you've liked it, make a short video of it. Put it on social media. Those who cannot read 500, 600 page books, they at least see a 20-minute YouTube video or whatever, and use every medium that is there, Instagram, live, or whatever else you want to do. Have a book reading session amongst yourselves, amongst people, and spread that knowledge. It's like a diya. From one to one, you just light the lamp so that the lamp of knowledge is spread, and that's the motto of this institution as well.
I'll just take a couple of minutes to answer this question.
Yes.
A friend of mine young friend of mine who was studying in IIM, when he was graduating, he asked me the same question: what can I do to do my bit? I told him, focus next 5 years on getting rich. It's sensible advice. 5 years, give it to yourself, give it to your career, and while you're earning money, those 5 years, enhance your knowledge, do your sadhana, read up, support at least 2 organizations that work in the field that you are passionate about, give them a fixed amount of money every month. And then after 5 years, when you've got enough equity in your organization, in your life, in your bank, then you can do a lot more. It's actually sensible advice.
Which is exactly what I did without having you as my advisor, Shefali. That after all that was read, engineering, MBA, this and that, for 9 years I was in the corporate sector, completely fish out of water, working in mundane things as looking at Excel sheets to look at the profit and loss of a American company, Citibank, Hewlett Packard, GE Money, what card should go to a Spanish, Hispanic immigrants in America. All that was being done, all the time cursing myself, saying what the hell am I doing of my life. Not that if the card sold more in the US, my manager would be very kind and give me a favorable review and my salary would go astronomically high. No. So somewhere there, even as I was doing that, I was continuing with all of this. 3 books I had written while I was doing my corporate job. And once, and every weekend, when most of my team members, all of them would go out on offsites and, malls and movies, I would be in some Gohar Jaan ki kabar dhoondte hue somewhere in Mysore or Calcutta and all that. And my manager would just not understand the motivation. He would ask me time and again that, he would pit me against some of my other team members. You are not even married. He has a wife and a son and other this thing. You can devote more to the team and then you will come up in your career. Why don't you one-upmanship against him and so on? But I said, no, I don't want to excel in this field. I'm doing it only and only for money until the time I manage enough that I can save for the future. Where, once the book started doing better, it was easy to throw that away and shift into something that is soul satisfying, something where I feel I've not made a hash of my life.
That's wonderful. Wish you the very best for your next books and hope to see you in Pune when your book on Shivaji Maharaj comes out.
Of course.
And thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. And you, sir, please meet me afterwards. You will get a book from me.
Before moving further, let me grab this opportunity to thank Mr. Vikram Sampath sir for enlightening us and wish him all the best for his new book and all the future adventures he embarks upon. We look forward to have many more interactions and many more books, sir. I would also extend my gratitude to Shefali ma'am for being with us tonight. I especially thank Dharmadhikari sir for presenting us this opportunity tonight. And now I kindly request sir to share a few words with us.
So you just saw how a fascist looks like. Yeah. No, when you say two, why are you excluding? Who are you excluding? What a charming way he says things. In such a disarming way that poor Shashi Tharoor doesn't know what is coming his way. Of course, I want to take this opportunity to absolutely wish him all eternal best wishes. We look forward to all further work that is coming up. I will be summarizing a very short kissa. Many of you may know that I was with Indian Army during Kargil War, where I got an opportunity to meet Major Mohit Saxena, who captured a certain extremely important military feature. He narrated that as he entered the Pakistani picket from behind, the Pakistani soldiers understood that they have lost the battle, so they dropped weapons and started running. Major Mohit Saxena accosted them. They raised their hands and said, इस बार गलती हुई जाने दो, दोबारा हिंदुस्तान लौट के नहीं आएंगे. And when Major Mohit Saxena was narrating this to me, and I answered, what did you do? There was a lump in my throat, and it was a whole historical lump, because that's what India's enemies have been saying all the time. And we have been allowing them to return so that they can come back with a vengeance the next year. इस बार गलती हुई, अब की बार जाने दो, दोबारा हिंदुस्तान लौट के नहीं आएंगे. So I said, Major Mohit Saxena, what did you do? He said, I shot them dead. So if Major Mohit Saxena shot them dead with bullets, Vikram Sampath is shooting them dead with intelligence. And a cool, collected discipline of a historian that is required. So obviously no jingoism. In fact, that dilutes the quality of historical work. In fact, you base what you are saying on careful, scientific study, then in fact the inspirational quality increases. And it is that discipline that is required. So Vikram Sampath is a great inspiring model for all of us. He has of course come out with an absolutely world-class 2-volume biography of Swatantra Veer Savarkar. And of course since that day he is persona non grata for the people who declaring a persona non grata is an honor to him. It is a world-class biography, mind you. Like William Manchester writing a 2-volume biography of Winston Churchill, or Boswell's Johnson, or the latest one being Walter Isaacson, the way he writes biographies, one of my heroes being Einstein, written by Walter Isaacson. I am happy to tell you my opinion that Vikram Sampath is absolutely second to none of them among the world class. I have made it a point to collect rest of his books and as is a discipline I like to follow, read. So he has also written History of Vadiyars, which is very important one for all of us. And I have read the whole book. Gauharjan and S. Balachandar I am looking forward to reading. But on and above all, I am looking forward to reading Shivaji Maharaj written by him. That when this discussion was going on all the time, why did we suffer from invasions, etc. And there were many references where I kept thinking about Shivaji Maharaj as among those of the greatest of the leaders who taught India to fight back and win. Fight back and win, mind you. And it is Jijau's inspiration. And two of the original documents that tell us about the record where Shivaji Maharaj himself is on record about what work is to be done. One is a slightly Persian sounding description, and he says, Ahat Peshawar, Tahat Tanjawar, Hindavi Swarajya he to Shrinchi Ichha. And another one is more Sanskritized Marathi, where he tells his Sardars that our task is to liberate India, Sindhu Nadicha Ugama Pasun Kavericha Sangama Parenta. So the whole idea of India, mind you, which has always been there in our alternating currents of national unity or political disunity, India as a civilizational unit that welcomes all kinds of diversity because we understand the unity at the core. It is the diversity of manifestations. So all of it is most welcome, but we are one people in all our glorious diversity. So I'm really looking forward to your book on Shivaji Maharaj.
Pressure बढ़ रहा है
Yeah. When the year 2022 started, I had an opportunity to also read and book launch the second volume of J. Sai Deepak's 3-volume trilogy. The function was in Pune, and when I read that, I thought I'm going to describe this book as best book of the year. Then came Snakes in Ganga by Rajiv Malhotra, and not that I replaced that book, I replaced J. Sai Deepak with Rajiv Malhotra, but I thought this year I'm going to have to say that there are two best books of the year. And now we have 3. Bravehearts of Bharat as best book of the year. And what it means in the process is that the civilizational, intellectual response of Bharat is coming back. So the illustrious list of J. Sai Deepak and Rajiv Malhotra and Vikram Sampath, and the list is growing. So those who are rooted in Bharatiya civilization and are intellectually responding to the situation, I'm saying they are growing. It's not like they were not there. They have always been there. Mind you, even when the British colonial rulers in general and Max Muller in particular was trying to build the Aryan invasion theory, there were 19th century historians themselves, and I would include Swami Vivekananda in the list, who were already responding to the British intellectual invasion and explaining that Aryan invasion theory is not true at all. So there always has been a robust response, but maybe for the larger part of last 70 years, Indian historiography has been dominated by the Marxist historians of Indian history. And they overshadowed all work when we know there always was Dharampal, and there was D.P. Singhal, and there are many, K.A. Nilkantha Shastri, the list will just go on, but they were like overshadowed. All of them are also coming back to light with even an improved version. So Vikram Sampath, Shefali Tai, myself and everyone sitting here is a part of that robust civilizational response of Bharat that needs to grow. And like Shefali Tai, I cannot resist the temptation of closing this by just trying to be as brief as I can to this particular question about what can I do. I call that as Chanakya Mandal formula, and we call that as Trisutri. Is knowledge of the self, find out yourself. Knowledge of the self, choose your path of life based on your knowledge of the self, and then whichever is the field, achieve excellence and creativity in your own chosen walk of life. That itself is service to Bharat Mata. achieving excellence and creativity in all walks of life, mind you. What we want is a new flourishing of Bharatiya genius in all walks of life, science and technology, Kala, Shastra, Sahitya, Nritya, Natya, Sangeet, Rajkaran, Samajkaran, Artha, no walk of life which should remain untouched with our creativity. So I am going to appeal that let's dedicate ourselves to developing this creativity, the creative genius of Bharatiya civilization, and therefore, of course, to close this program, let us say the prayer, Prarthana.
नव्या वैभवाचीच स्वप्ने सजावी
All the best, everybody.